Good evening and welcome to Roundtable. Today we have with us Professor Rajiva Wijesinghe. He is the chairman of the Council of Asian Liberals and Democrats, and he was the former secretary of the Ministry of Disaster Management and Human Rights, and also the former Secretary General of the Peace Secretariat. So good evening, Professor.
Good evening.
So last time when you joined the discussion at Roundtable, you were the former secretary of the Ministry of Disaster Management and Human Rights. Now it's a new post that you're holding, isn't it? So what is the reason for that, and what is your new role?
No, in actual fact, I'm afraid I'm one of the unemployed at the moment. The chairmanship of the Council of Asian Liberals and Democrats is an honorary post. It is a collection of the liberal and democratic parties of Asia, and we've had this association for the last 17 years, and the position has rotated, and it was Sri Lanka's turn this time, and the Liberal Party nominated me to be the chair, partly because, I've been working with them for the last 17 years.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you very much. It's an important and interesting role, I think, but of course, with a couple of exceptions, the Democrats in Thailand, we hope the Liberal Party in the Philippines, a lot of these parties are not parties in government. Of course, the Gerakan in Malaysia is part of the governing coalition, as indeed the Liberal Party would hope to be in Sri Lanka. But it's not a full-time job at all, so I'm really vastly unemployed.
And the reason why you're still not the former secretary of the Human Rights?
Not the secretary, is because I had to resign, both from that and from my university position, because I'm on the national list for the UPFA in the forthcoming election. And unfortunately, not only do you have to resign, but if you resign suddenly, you have to pay a month's salary as well.
Right, okay. So then today our discussion, we were planning to focus this on a event that is in the news now, and that is today is the day the former general was court-martialed, and in the history of Sri Lanka it's the first time an army officer, ex-army officer of the highest rank is actually court-martialed this way, Professor. So if you look at the newspapers and the debate that has sort of started around this incident, we also see the former Chief Justice take on the matter, where he is highly critical of the events that has taken place, that is from the time of the arrest of the former general. So what are your comments on this, to the fact that the arrest itself was illegal, and the fact that the former general was detained over a period of 1 month was illegal?
Well, I have to say I read with great interest Mr. Sarath Silva's long article on this. I felt it was a bit disingenuous. He ends up saying he appeals on humanitarian grounds without prejudice to an illegal authority. He may be frightened that someone will do him for contempt of court, which of course he has done himself in the past. But I think it was rather sad that he didn't say that he had been a strong supporter of the general. And indeed there was talk that he might even be the Prime Minister had, God forbid, the general been elected president. So, I think it's important in any legal proceedings to declare your interests. And it's sad that the former Chief Justice didn't do it. I think another rather sad thing, he actually seems to have forgotten completely to read all the acts that he refers to. For instance, one point that he claims in saying all this is illegal is he says that the commander of the army is not an officer or soldier.
Yes.
Now, that's bizarre. He bases this on the assumption that the president, or in the act also you have the governor general, could appoint anybody as army commander. And I suppose there's a case to be argued that if the president decided to appoint you as army commander, it could be claimed you are not an officer. But that argument doesn't mean that someone who is an officer and appointed army commander ceases to be an officer. And in fact, we know perfectly well that General Fonseca was promoted in office. So you can't really go from being a 3-star general to a 4-star general if you're not an officer. But the other total absurdity is this man, the Chief Justice, hasn't read the Act, because the Chief of Defence Staff's Act says that the President shall appoint from the commanders of Army, Navy and Air Force an officer to be CDS, which means the man he appointed as CDS was an officer. So on Sarath Silva, I confused my Saraths, I'm afraid, on his strange way of looking at things, here was an officer who ceased to be an officer the day he was appointed army commander. Then he became an officer again to be promoted from a 3-star to a 4-star. Then he stopped being an officer again. Then when he was appointed Chief of Defence Staff, he was an officer, because the Act 3 times says it's an officer who is appointed. Now he ceases to be an officer. I mean, the man is bonkers.
But he also quotes the Army Act, and he says section 150 of that relates to the arrest of any person connected to army, and those people, whoever that is a deserter or absentees without leave. And then he also goes to quote section 35 of the Army Act, which again says that the act provides that a person subject to military law who commits any military or civil offence may be taken into military custody. Then he goes on to talk about section 57, which extends section 35 of that Army Act, which says that it can be subject to a person who ceases to be a subject of the military law, but in respect of the offences committed while he was subject to military law. So the question he poses is, Professor, to ask whether the former general was a person actually subject to military law, whether when he functioned as the commander of the army and also the chief of defense staff. That is the question he poses based on the quotations of these sections.
Yeah, but I mean, I've just answered that. Though his argument of saying that the army commander is not subject to military law, is neither an officer nor a soldier.
Yes.
But he obviously is an officer, otherwise he couldn't be promoted. He was an officer when he was appointed, and he had to continue to be an officer, otherwise he couldn't be appointed CDS. The CDS Act says very clearly that the person who's made CDS continues to be in the service to which he originally belongs. Sarath Silva actually is a bit of a cheat, because he deemed to continue. That's not what the Act says. And then he talks about this deeming. There's no deeming here. He continues is what the Act says very clearly. So he is a member of the army after he became Chief of Defence Staff, and after he resigns for 6 months more he can be arrested. So I really don't know what the man is talking about. It is dishonest. Because, you know, if the Act says very clearly that the Chief of Defence Staff in 3 places is an officer, why does this man claim he's not an officer? No, you can't quote selectively for an act. It really does make one worry whether this is the sort of way he functions as Chief Justice. Because you can't, if you're a judge, select what you like from an act and say that's what it is. And this is dishonesty. It's rank dishonesty.
And also another allegation the former Chief Justice makes is, as I referred to earlier, is the detail, like arrest, how it happened is illegal, and also the fact that when an officer is arrested, that the reasons for arrest and the charges has to be known to the party on the spot, and also it is the due process is such that the officer has to be subjected to a court or a magistrate within 24 hours, and the former general has not been subjected to a court that way, and he has been detained over 1 month. So it's another criticism he's making of the procedures.
Well, those were not in the article that I read. He does talk about the arrest, but of course it was based on the assumption that the general could not be arrested by military personnel on the grounds that he wasn't an officer, whereas I think we've proved very clearly that he was an officer and therefore military law can apply. I mean, I say this as someone who actually would have preferred a civil trial, not because I don't think a military trial is illegal, but for the very simple reason that other people would object. I mean, I don't suppose Sarath Silva, given his interest in the case, will be taken very seriously by people who, you know, in Sri Lanka. People abroad might think of him as a Chief Justice. Though again, interestingly, I mean, when we were in Geneva last time, the whole ICJ report that was critical of Sri Lanka was much of it critical of Sarath Silva, suggesting that he perverted the judiciary. I didn't agree with that. You know, that's not perhaps a fair assessment of what he did. So I don't think internationally also this man has as much stature as perhaps he'd like to think he has. On all the other areas that he's brought up, I mean, he claims that Sarath Fonseca wasn't told what the charges were. As I said, the reports we got after the case was that the chaps who went in tried to read him these and he ignored it and said he couldn't listen to this because he wanted to be arrested civilly. So if you look at what the article says, the main point is he's not subject to military law, which very clearly is a lie, because he wasn't an officer. So I don't think that we can take Sarath Silva very seriously. There are other areas in which he says there's no one senior to the commander of the... But, you know, what does the word commander-in-chief mean?
Yeah, because what he says is even to arrest, according to the Army Act, it can done